Good evening, everyone. My name is Celeste Licorish. How's everybody doing tonight? Was Beatrice not awesome? She was just fantastic. What a great way to kick it off. So I'm going to spend my 9 minutes telling you about an organization that I worked with directly, tell you the story of how that evolved, and maybe leave you with some inspiration on how you can help people that you're working with in your individual organizations. I don't have any slides or anything, so it's just going to be me telling the story. So a couple of years ago, I started with an organization called the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. They're in Hamilton, and they are a collaborative group of organizations that want to eliminate poverty. Their aspiration is to make Hamilton the best place to raise a child. From Hamilton, it's just around the corner for those of you who don't know, halfway between here and Niagara Falls. They say that if Hamilton's the best place to raise a child, that means that people will have enough food, they'll have jobs, they'll have adequate housing, they'll have what they need to thrive. But the reality is that in Hamilton, about 100,000 people live below the poverty line. They've been working for about 8 years on this work collectively, and realized that one of the most powerful things they had going for them was when people with lived experience of poverty, people who are actually living below the poverty line in that struggle, got to share their stories. When people told their own stories, it made a difference. It connected with people in ways that just the statistics wouldn't and couldn't. And so a couple of years ago, they said, why don't we start a speakers bureau? Why don't we find a group of people with lived experience and invite them, train them, and have them go out and tell their stories? They called this shifting attitudes. If we can get people to share their stories, it'll help make a difference. They didn't have anyone to coordinate that, and they hired me to do it. One of the reasons they hired me is because I happen to be a person with lived experience. At the time that they hired me, I was working on a construction site. I had had a corporate job, it wasn't great, I had been downsized, right-sized, and I decided that my best shot was to get something practical. I was going to learn to build houses. And so I went to construction school and I learned to build houses. And it was while I was working in the north end of Hamilton, which is one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city, building fences and decks for other of my low-income neighbors, that I got calls from people saying that they needed someone to coordinate the Speakers Bureau and that they thought that maybe I had the skills to do this. At the time, I wasn't sure that I did, but it resonated with me enough to think that if I, as a low-income person, could help inspire other people to tell their stories and make a difference for something larger so that maybe poverty could begin to not be as bad, that was a worthwhile gesture. So I rose to the challenge. I said, yes, I'm in, I'm going to try this. I applied, I got the job, and then my job was to find other people who were also living in poverty, who wanted to learn public speaking, but who also believed in something a little bit bigger than their current struggle. So I designed a curriculum, I found trainers, and I found 60 people who wanted to apply to learn to tell their stories. So what was in it for them? They were going to get some hard skills in public speaking, which people are not generally born knowing how to do. But they were also going to get to give back. And I think one of the things that people don't realize is that no matter where you are on the socioeconomic scale, everybody has something in them to give. Everyone has a gift. I think a lot of our interactions with people living in poverty assume that it should just be transactional. If you go to the food bank, it's because you're hungry and you need food. Beatrice mentioned that there's so many intersectionalities. You didn't wake up one morning and decide, I'm just going to be this poor person, I have to go to the food bank, and that's all you are. So I found people who were interested in telling their stories, and we set about training. We were strangers. All we knew is that we were going to try. In that 12 weeks of training, the people who came to us, we shared, we were open with each other, we learned to tell our stories, we learned to talk about things that we hadn't talked about publicly to ourselves, let alone to greater audiences. And so that was the spark that began what became a really beautiful thing for us, that we realized that there's so much power in saying your truth out loud and sharing it with others and having other people around the room say, yeah, I've gone through that too when my hydro is going to be cut off and I don't know what to do. We were able to share those stories. By the end of our 12-week training, everyone had a 5 to 7 minute story. And we were all bonded. We were this group. We were now Speak Now Hamilton. And we went out into the community. We had organizations, schools, churches, boards of directors, city councilors that said, we want to hear your stories. And we started to go out and share. And that's when something else really beautiful began to happen. We began to realize that the empathy that can be developed when you are speaking face to face and heart to heart with people, and you're not standing in the welfare line asking not to be cut off or why you've been cut off. You're not standing in front of a social worker who is asking you questions about how you're raising your children. You're not asking for anything but to have people hear your story. There is something dignified and powerful about that. And the responses that we began to get from audiences really changed the way we began to see ourselves and our role as speakers. It was really quite powerful. Many of the people who started in Speak Now, through this process of telling their story and hearing their story and hearing, I'm not alone, this isn't my fault, there's a bigger system, it's not my fault that I am living in poverty. There's a system that doesn't give us enough money a month. If you're on social assistance or ODSP, you just don't get enough to make ends meet. But a lot of what became dignity started off as shame. And that was that transformation that began to really make a difference for us as individuals. So people who are in Speak Now moved from just feeling like victims who are learning public speaking who want to tell a story to becoming empowered advocates. One woman who was homeless throughout our training period. We didn't know she was homeless throughout the training. She became housed. Now she is an advocate for housing. She goes across the country, she talks to people about the importance of not only housing people, but building a community around people who have been homeless. One of the things that we tend to do is put people and situations in silos, and that intersectionality is so important when we're talking about how we engage people. One of the other really important things that happened through the process of Speak Now being developed within the context of the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction is that the Roundtable itself began to recognize that when you have a powerful group of people with lived experience, you better be prepared. You need to make room for them to be able to expand and grow and develop. The Roundtable maybe thought that they were there to sort of create this space so we would just go out and tell our stories. What they didn't recognize is that they're really walking alongside individuals on their journey. Some people have decided to leave Speak Now and go back to school. They've decided to get higher education. Some have moved and found jobs. Others have become really passionate advocates for what's important to them. So I'll tell you a little bit about my journey away from Speak Now. Just a month ago, I was offered an opportunity to leave Speak Now, which was near and dear to my heart. I was part of growing this amazing group of speakers and seeing the impact and the power in our community and what it meant for people to be hearing people with lived experience tell their stories. But I got the opportunity to work for the Hamilton Community Foundation. So now I'm talking to donors and people who are going to help support the work so that programs like Speak Now can keep going. What my moving out of Speak Now did for the people in Speak Now was to say, movement means change. So many of the time we get stuck in programs. We say, well, this program has to exist and we need these people to do this thing. When I announced to our Speakers Bureau that I was moving on to become an advisor in the Community Foundation, they said, oh my goodness, change is real. Change can happen. Our stories don't need to stay static. And it was a beautiful thing. So tonight, I'm really thrilled to be here sharing a little bit of what Speak Now has done for our community with you, and hope that it inspires you in whatever work you're doing to think about your actions being transformational and not just transactional. Every interaction that you have with people living in poverty, there's so much more to whoever that person is in front of you, whether it's in the food bank or in a social work group or whatever it is. There's a whole life behind it. Take time to listen to their stories. Make opportunities that people can share who they are and share with you, and you will have a richer experience. You'll become richer for it, and so will they. And that's it. Thank you.